This is Charlotte Talks. I'm Mike Collins. Over the weekend, people in cities around the country participated in the third annual Women's Marches. This weekend, Charlotte's third annual Women's March will take place, this time with a new name, Women United March. In previous years, women's marches drew spectacular crowds, but in this past weekend, the crowds were a little smaller. In Charlotte, crowds diminished in successive years, but organizers this year are stressing unity among all women in efforts to dispel the mistaken notion that these are white women-only marches. In fact, event leaders have partnered with the National Coalition of 100 Black Women's Queen City chapter. They're also stressing that the march is not intended to be political and have asked speakers to tone down Trump bashing. This hour, we talk about the Charlotte March to come and hear about what happened this past weekend at marches around the nation. Gina Navarrete is Communications Group co-chair and a co-president of the Charlotte Women's March. She joins us in our Spirit Square studio along with Renee Hill, a board member of the National Coalition of 100 Black Women Charlotte and co-chair of the Women United March. Welcome to you both. Nice to see you here.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you.
And joining us from the New York Times is Farah Stockman, who has been following these events and whose article on this weekend's marches you may have read in the Times or, in fact, in the Charlotte Observer. They reprinted that story. Thank you for joining us as well.
Thanks for having me.
And she joins us via Skype. If you'd like to join our conversation, you can email us at charlottetalks@wfae.org. Search for WFAE on Facebook or get to us through Twitter at Charlotte Talks. You can also watch us in the studio, at least, on Facebook Live. Farah, let me begin with you and with a recap of what happened this past weekend. The marches in Washington and New York and Philadelphia and elsewhere did draw smaller crowds than in previous years. Was that inevitable?
I think, of course, it was inevitable that the marches would not draw the same number of people as came out in 2017 when it was just an historic moment. And I think the organizers of the March on Washington, after that first big march, were a little conflicted about whether they should try to do it again because it's so hard to get that same number of people. So to some level, it was inevitable, but there's also been a lot of self-inflicted wounds and among the March leadership that have, I think, caused a bigger drop-off than we would have seen.
Which we'll talk about. Let's go back to that very first march on the day after Donald Trump's inauguration. What was the driving force behind that? Was it simply the presence of Donald Trump in the White House, or was it something else at work?
I mean, there were a lot of things going on, but yes, I think so many people came because it was the first, it was the first moment that people could get together and say, hey, we're not sure we like the direction that the country is going. I was in Washington for that march, and it was just an incredible assortment of people, wall-to-wall people, and far more people than had come out from the inauguration to say, like, you know, they were uncomfortable with a president that had made remarks about women, that, the grabbing remarks about women. And you could see on all the signs that they were, it really was an anti-Trump rally in Washington, D.C., for sure.
I'm not sure which one of you, our guests in the studio, Gina or Renee, or maybe both of you, I should ask this question. What do you think women wanted to accomplish in that first march? And how did that first march shape whatever has happened with that movement since that time? Renee.
Well, I think that people really wanted to have a voice during that first march. There was real concern about the direction that the country was taking. There was real concern that women's issues were going to be kind of rolled under the bush and not really brought out, and that a lot of other really critical issues, climate control and other, really critical issues, were going to have we're going to take a step backward. And so as a result of that, you saw women and men, because I came to that first march, women, men, children, all come out to just have an opportunity to express their concern about the direction that the country was taking.
And I know because we did a program on the first march, we did a program on the second march here in Charlotte, now we're doing a program on the third march, and each time we've had different guests to talk about this. But I do know that the motivating factor, or at least what they wanted to communicate from those first two marches, and probably the third, which we'll talk about this hour, has changed. It's morphed a little bit over the years. Correct, Gina?
Yes, I agree. And I think that for a lot of people like myself, white women, part of it was kind of a waking up to, to what's going on.
Because a lot of people had not been political to that point.
Exactly. And some of us had been political. And then, you start graduate school, you have a family, and life happens, and we stop being political. And so this was a big wake-up moment for myself, and I think for a lot of women like myself.
So it was a wake-up and for a lot of women, and a lot of women, and we'll talk about this too, but a lot of women have gone to Congress since that first march, and a lot of it, you can lay the credit for that on that first march, because a lot of women became, as they say in the vernacular, woke. Why
and
do you
local offices as well.
Why do you want to tamp down on the political aspect of this time around?
I don't think we really want to clamp down on the political aspect of it. This is a nonpartisan event. And there's a difference between, I think, being nonpartisan and being non-political. So to the extent that we don't want this march to be about any particular candidate, we want this march to be about women and women's issues. And as a result of that... And
being active no matter what your point of view may be? Is that a way to say it?
Yes. Yes, absolutely. It's important that we recognize that the issues that women have are not connected to necessarily a particular political party. Mm-hmm. It's not an issue of Republicans. It's not an issue of Democrats. These are women's issues, and that we as women have a lot of issues in common. We're not always going to agree on every issue, but we have a lot of issues in common. We need to be listening to each other, learning from each other, and empowering each other to make some change in this world.
So, Farah, that first march, a lot of women found their voices. A lot of women began to see the world slightly differently through a more political lens, or at least they began to see that issues important to them needed to be raised and talked about and not brushed under the carpet. Given the fact that with every iteration of these marches, the number of participants has fallen, is it simply a realization that marches can only achieve so much? Is it Trump fatigue? Or is it what you referred to a few minutes ago as the biggest factor, these charges of anti-Semitism and mismanagement that have been leveled at the leaders of the national movement?
I think all of those things, plus the weather.
Well, that does play a role.
I was out there in Boston. I think it's all of the above. I mean, that first year there was a ton of marches in Boston. I live in Boston, and the Science March. There was 1 million, and they had a lot of participants. So the Women's March sort of kicked off this enormous groundswell of people who said, "Hey, we can fight this." And a lot of people have told me that was the first time they felt hopeful since Donald Trump was elected. And so it kicked off a lot of energy. And so yes, I think that maybe 2 years in, people are tired. But I also think that the march leaders have, it's one thing to plan a march. It's another thing to turn that into a movement. And they've made some mistakes that for some people have caused a lot of acrimony and problems that may not have. I don't know. They may have been avoidable.
What kind of a role might the increasing number of women in political office, both at the local level and at the national level, have played in this? Could there be a sense of mission accomplished that's lulling people into a sense that maybe there's not so much urgency anymore? We now have a seat at the table.
I think there's some of that. People feel it's less of an emergency now for some people now that Democrats recaptured the House. I also think some people have transformed they've transferred the energy from marches to political action, and they are now organizers, explicitly working in politics. So they may say, well, the time for marching is in the past, and now it's time for, getting out the vote, which was a little bit what happened last year. A lot of there were like march to the polls, power to the polls, and it was all about the midterm elections.
So let's talk about these fissures that appeared, and they actually appeared at the very beginnings of this movement several years ago when a woman named Tamika Mallory and Carmen Perez told Jewish activists that they needed to confront their own role in racism. And this time around, Tamika Mallory is at the crux of another rift surrounding charges of anti-Semitism on her part and that of the New York-based leadership of the National Women's March group. She, Tamika Mallory, is co-president of the Women's March, and she has publicly praised Louis Farrakhan, who is the head of the Nation of Islam, and he holds anti-Semitic views. That's widely known, and it caused march organizers in Chicago and New Orleans and elsewhere to cancel their marches. Why did some potential marchers see this as something that they couldn't be associated with, while others perhaps didn't care, or they gritted their teeth and participated anyway?
Well, I think. I'm not sure why some marches, some women's march groups dissolved or chose to march on a different day or take different steps to disassociate.
And in some cities there were two marches simultaneously.
Yeah, right. I think that some people have been satisfied with the steps that the Women's March leadership have taken. Tamika Mallory has said she doesn't agree with everything Louis Farrakhan has said, and she's tried to explain to people that in the Black community in New York, Farrakhan has done positive things, and so she doesn't want to throw him away as a leader. In a certain way, this is a reflection of an old story between the Black community and the Jewish community in New York. The Black community very much celebrated Louis Farrakhan, and he threw that million-man march, and lots of people went, even people who had nothing to do with the Nation of Islam. But for Jewish people, Louis Farrakhan is the leader of a hate group, and the things that he says are unacceptable. And so I think in New York, it caused a lot of turmoil because there were a lot of Jewish people who said we can't stand by someone who won't denounce Farrakhan as a person.
Has this trickled down? Are there reverberations of this in the local March community?
Yeah,
Gina?
there's a lot of misunderstanding, thinking that we are part of the National Women's March, and we're not. We condemn all hate speech. And this is one of the reasons why our march has taken the standpoint this year of being, quote, non-political. It's not necessarily that we're non-political, but we see ourselves as above politics, way beyond politics.
And locally homegrown, is that also a phrase that you're using to distance yourself from the national organization?
Correct. I think we see also a lot of problems in Charlotte that are particular to Charlotte, and we see a lot of people and a lot of groups that need help, and we are trying to kind of get people just beyond politics and to get to work.
Gina Navarrete is a communications group co-chair and co-president of the Charlotte Women's March. She's in our studio with Renee Hill with 100 Black Women of Charlotte and the co-chair of the march, and Farah Stockman joins us from the New York Times. We have to take a break. We're coming right back at Charlotte Talks on WFAE. Support for Charlotte Talks comes from WFAE members and Habitat Charlotte Restores, where donations of furniture, books, and appliances are sold to create affordable housing. 4 locations, including Wendover and Wilkinson. More at charlotterestore.org. And Blumenthal Performing Arts, presenting a conversation with Bob Woodward, investigative journalist, author, and associate editor of The Washington Post, February 3rd at Belk Theater. Tickets at 704-372-1000. Our city is engaged in a community community book read, where several organizations have held discussions on Richard Rothstein's book, The Color of Law. It illustrates how laws and housing policy at all levels promoted discriminatory patterns that continue to this day. And community read organizers hope that learning from policy mistakes will produce better future decisions. We hear about what has resulted from these community discussions and talk to the author tomorrow on this program at 9.
When were you shown how to manage your money, or were you shown at all? Chances are no one taught you in high school, but some states are now pushing schools to give personal finance as much attention as quadratic equations. I'm Joshua Johnson, the new push to make America's kids financially literate. Next time on 1A from WAMU and NPR.
1A coming up right after Charlotte Talks from 10 to noon here on 90.7 WFAE, Charlotte's NPR news source.
It's Charlotte Talks on listener-funded 90.7 WFAE and 90.3 WFHE. I'm Mike Collins. We're talking about the women's marches, most of which took place last weekend around the country, but also the Charlotte Women's March, which is the Charlotte Women United March. It takes place this coming Saturday, begins at 11 o'clock at First Ward Park. We're here with Gina Navarrete, whose title keeps changing. She's the co-president of the Charlotte Women's March. And Renee Hill is in our studio, board member of the 100 Black Women of the Queen City Metropolitan Chapter. Is that close?
The National Coalition of 100 Black Women, Queen City Metropolitan Chapter.
I'm going to let you say that every time.
That's right.
and the co-chair of the march here, Farah Stockman, joins us. She's a reporter for the New York Times who has been covering these marches. I know that here in Charlotte, organizers have been in conversations with Rabbi Judy Schindler, who used to be a working rabbi at one of the temples in town, but now is Jewish studies professor at Queen's University of Charlotte and a scheduled speaker on Saturday. She views the event as, quote, not just a march, but as a movement toward justice. Wasn't justice at the genesis of this movement 2 years ago? Wasn't that what this was all about when you boil it down to its basics?
Correct. I think that, we are trying to work with Rabbi Judy Schindler, and because of that. And she actually just had a seminar series about going from marches to movements. And that's something at the core of our organization, which has been, marches are great, but nothing changes with just marches. Right. You have to roll up your sleeves and get to work and work for justice.
And for the people who take time out of their lives and be part of these marches and come to listen to the speakers, et cetera, is that what's in the front and center of their mind, Renee? Is it justice? Or is it a particular issue in some people's lives?
I think we're going to have a diverse group of women out there, and that women are going to be out there with passion about a particular issue. We're not all women are not the same. And we recognize that. We do believe that there's some common issues that we can all wrap our arms around. Education for all. Equal education for all, equal justice issues, gender equality. I mean, there's some common issues that I think women can wrap their arms around and stay united. We need to learn about those issues that we can all stand together on and move forward to try to do some transformative change. And we need to be civil. I mean, I think what the country has lacked in the last few years is some civility.
Yeah.
And so we need to respectfully disagree with women that don't necessarily share our points of view.
That's a challenge in any group. It's not just women's groups or women's marches. It's a challenge when you have more than two people in a room. When you have two people in a room, there are going to be disagreements amongst themselves. But Farah, in your reporting, you have pointed out that in addition to the anti-Semitism controversy, tensions were already brewing between national women's march groups and some of the local groups around the country. Why?
Yeah, it's really fascinating right now to hear you all talk from a local perspective, because this movement has really been 1,000 flowers blooming. It wasn't just that huge march in Washington. It was marches all across the country that were planned by activists in their own hometowns, and that were in some ways very, very powerful and possibly even more powerful. And I think the group that planned that big national Washington march saw themselves as the leaders of this movement. And they set about, after the march, trying to exert some kind of control. They filed a trademark on the name Women's March. They started reaching out to these local groups that plan sister marches to tell them, hey, here's what we could do going forward. Everything was coming from them. They would issue directives, and in one case in California, they tried to kick a local organizer off and say, no, you can't call yourself Women's March anymore. You're not planning the Women's March here. And so it was that kind of. I think there was resentment from some of these Sister March people on the ground who said, you all are taking credit for our work. This was the biggest, one of the biggest protests in U.S. history, but not just because of what you did, but also because of what we did. Mm-hmm. And you need to give us a seat at the table. But they never created a board that put local Sister March organizers on it. They really kept power in their own hands. And these were 6 women in New York City at the end of the day who were sort of planning the future of this movement for the whole country. And lots of women elsewhere, especially in red states, said, well, whatever you guys are doing doesn't resonate with us. That happened. So that's one of the reasons there was tension. Another reason.
Some of that has happened here, has it not? I mean, is that why over the last 3 years I've had 3 sets of guests talking about this same march? Because people are dropping out, or because there are disagreements, or the politics, the interscene politics of all this has come into play? Well, this is not a criticism. This is a fact of life in any
the first march was created by, I think, 4 or 5 women locally.
Okay.
And they just put the march together, and then they said that they basically kind of just went back to their lives, And we had a couple of women that have been very active in our group. The Charlotte Women's March was created from a lot of women that went to D.C. to the large march, and then we came back and we decided we can't let this just die down. Mm-hmm. And so we had Jane Anderson as our first president, and she was president for the second march, and then which she continues to be on the board as past president. So I don't think we've had a lot of kind of infighting on our board. I think there's always criticism, and especially today with social media, there can always be things that are different. Sure. And I think we've tried to embrace that. We were kind of accused of being too white for the first and the second march, and that's why we decided to reach out to other communities.
I want to get to that in a second. I have to let Farah Stockman from the New York Times go in a second because she has something else to go to. As you spoke with participants in Boston and Philadelphia and D.C. and New York, or as you reported on this, what seems to be the biggest motivating factor for those involved who come to the march, who aren't leaders of the march? They just come. They bring their kids, they bring their husband, they bring their boyfriends. Boyfriends bring their girlfriends. What's the motivating factor here? Is there a common thread?
I think people feel they want a feeling like they're not alone in their beliefs. They want to commune with like-minded people, and they come to these events to get energy. So some of them are folks who just, they've been really frustrated with the state of politics, and they want to come and just be rejuvenated. And a lot of people got incredible energy from that first march and being in an enormous group of people that validated their feelings.
Are other cities tamping down or discouraging partisan political discussion, or do they want that in some other cities?
I feel they were very political in the cities that we looked at.
And is that to say liberal?
Yes. I mean, I think most of these women in Boston were coming for abortion rights, or they were coming for climate justice. They were coming for a range of liberal causes. But I have heard that in LA, pro-life women were marching. There are, I think, attempts in other cities to sort of broaden it out. But the question, when you talk about women's issues, what do you mean? Women are immigrants, so undocumented women, is that a woman's issue? Women have kids in prison, or sons who've been harassed by police. Is that a woman's issue? And so I think part of what we're wrestling with in a very beautiful way, in a way, is which causes can be put in this basket of women's issues. How broad should this women's issues become? And I think that's one of the things that people are struggling with, and different cities may have they may come out with different answers.
Farah Stockman has been reporting on these marches around the country for the New York Times, and some of her writing has also appeared here in the Charlotte Observer as a result of the syndicate agreement that they have together, I suppose. Thank you for joining us. I appreciate it.
Hey, thanks for having me on.
You're very welcome. Now, there has been some tension in Charlotte, fueled in part by perceptions, as Gina pointed out, that this march in the last several years has been for white women only, and organizers insist that is a misperception. And is that why you, Renee, are here, and why say the name of the National
Coalition of 100 Black Women, Queen City Metropolitan Chapter.
Is that why you are kind of a co-sponsor, a headline co-chair?
Yes. I mean, I think that the Women's March group reached out to the National Coalition of 100 Black Women and asked us to participate with them in organizing this event, and we were really excited about it. It's part of our national mission. Our national organization believes that we should harness the political powers of diverse women and communities and in order to create transformative change. And as a result of that, we need to be in a position where we're out there in the forefront advocating for women's issues.
Glenn Berkins, who is the editor and publisher of QCityMetro.com, and he's a frequent guest on this program on the Friday News Roundups, wrote, I think, last year about the Women's March that it was, quote, decidedly white, that women of color were underrepresented. Was that because of organizers or anybody in control of that march, or was it simply that black women decided this wasn't for them and they stayed home, or they didn't know about it, or why didn't they come out?
Well, I'm a black female. I participated in the first march, and I was there in the second march.
Why didn't more? Was there a message being sent? Did it feel foreign to some people?
No, I think that people need to reach out to the communities, and that's one of the things that the National Coalition of 100 Black Women, Queen City Metropolitan Chapter, has really tried to do, is to actually reach out and make this important to the various communities. It's not that, everybody is busy. We all have schedules. We all have things that we have to do. And as a result of that, we pick and choose what we do, and we need to make this important to our community.
Because this is not particular to Charlotte. The Washington Post wrote about this, about the first march, saying that the white feminists had dominated the demonstrations and ignored crucial issues for people of color. And they wrote about this under the headline, "Was the Women's March just another display of white privilege?" Was it? Were people of color's issues ignored?
Well, I would like to invite people to come out to this year's march.
Okay.
This is Women United March. You're going to find that this year's march is going to have a broad base of people there. We've made an effort to make sure that our speakers are a diverse group of people with a diverse, wide range of views. You will see people of color. You will see people with different perspectives with respect to gender. You will see people with a variety of views, and as a result of that, this year's march is really going to be different, I think. Our keynote speakers this year are Justice Anita Earls and Rabbi Judith Schindler. And we have a wide variety of other speakers dealing with different issues, and I think that this year's march is really going to be different.
So when you dissect it, What's the difference? What are the issues that seem not to be that the first march really focused on that did not resonate necessarily with people in the African American community, and vice versa? Where's the coming together point?
I think part of the issue was that as white women, we were not necessarily sensitive to some of the issues that Black and Latina women have been dealing with for many, many years. For example, we talk about equal pay, but equal pay for equal work, but never address the fact that while Black women and Latina women make actually less on the dollar compared to men than white women. So we just assume.
But if you're asking for equal pay for equal work, why doesn't that speak to Latinas and to Black women?
I think people.
Because I think you're including them, aren't you, automatically?
Absolutely, but I think that there was kind of people felt like we were not listening. People felt like we were ignorant about the issues and that we were insensitive to their issues. And I think that there's been a lot of growth. I can tell you there's been a lot of growth on our board. We've taken it very seriously about adding diversity to our board, adding diversity to reaching out to different groups, adding diversity to our speakers.
And I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm really concerned about the divide and conquer kind of perspective that we have in today's society. Okay. And, we really have a lot of issues in common. And I think it really, to me, it's kind of a distraction in some respects to focus on whether it was the white feminists, because you're right. In many respects, equal pay for equal pay for equal work should resonate with all. Quality education for all our children should resonate with all. And so we just have to try to bring that message to the table, that we understand that, my experience as a Black female is not going to be the same as Laura's experience or Gina's experience as Latino or white women, right? They're just not going to be the same. And we're going to be passionate about some issues that maybe they're not passionate about, but yet we have some common bond that we need to make sure that we celebrate and bring to the table.
This may, because of the time allotted in this segment, this may have to be a split answer. We have to come back to this question. But the question is, I know you want to lower the temperature on political rhetoric, but this is, by its very nature, a political moment in time. If you want to achieve any of the things that you say you want to achieve, it has to be done through politics. So how do you tamp down the politics of the speeches and the signs and the marches and the chants and still achieve the goals?
But you said it. We want to tamper down the rhetoric. We want to tamper down the hate speech. We want to tamper down. The fact is that anger, the fact is that hate is not sustainable. And I think that is some of the reasons why some of the other marches have kind of fizzled out. I think what we are trying to do in Charlotte is we are trying to focus on the issues, not the politics.
We'll come back to that because I want to see how you're going to do that. Gina Navarrete is here from the Charlotte Women's March, the Charlotte Women's United March, as is Renee Hill, and we're coming right back at Charlotte Talks on WFAE. Support for Charlotte Talks comes from WFAE members and the Umstead Hotel and Spa, a destination in the Triangle featuring lakeview rooms, seasonal cuisine, a spa inspired by nature, and spacious event venues. Information at theumstead.com. And Willis Towers Watson, dedicated to helping organizations navigate the challenges of a complex and changing world with an integrated approach to risk and human capital management. WillisTowersWatson.com. The government shutdown is now in its fourth week, and the economic consequences are becoming clearer. Coming up in 20 minutes at 10 o'clock on 1A, Joshua Johnson and his guests hear shutdown stories from across the nation and talk about what citizens want lawmakers to do to end the shutdown. That's coming up in 20 minutes. And we will continue our conversation about the upcoming Women's March here in Charlotte and what happened around the country as well at the marches this past weekend when we come back in about 30 seconds.
Celebrate WFAE, the season of love, and all things chocolate. Friday, February 15th at the Charlotte Museum of History. Enjoy chocolates, chocolate desserts, and other chocolate-inspired items from area chocolatiers, bakeries, wineries, and others. Proceeds from this decadent event will benefit WFAE. Tickets and information at WFAE.org. Chocolate is sponsored by SunTrust.
It's Charlotte Talks on WFAE and WFHE. I'm Mike Collins. We're talking about the Charlotte Women's United March. It steps off on Saturday at 11 at First Ward Park. Gina Navarrete is the co-chair or the co-president of the Charlotte Women's March. Renee Hill is also a
co-chair of the Women United March.
Of the Women United March, right. Exactly. And with the National Coalition of
100 Black Women, Queen City Metropolitan Chapter.
Easy for you to say. Okay. So let's go back to this political aspect of this, because you do want to tamp down on derogatory rhetoric, hate speech. You don't want this to be a moment where everybody gets together and bashes Donald Trump. But you do want your issues to be raised to the fore, and you do want people to become energized with those issues. In this world that has become so divided and so angry and so mean, and where epithets are just thrown as though they're the words and and thee today, how do you achieve that, and how do you break through the noise if you're going to be nice?
Oh, I don't know if we're going to be nice. That may be stretching a bit, because I think people are going to be passionate about their perspective and their issues. And as a result of that, you may not have it may not always be nice, but it won't be bashing.
Okay.
We will not be looking at a political candidate. We've asked our speakers, at least, not to look at a political candidate and say, we hate so-and-so. We don't like what so-and-so's doing. There's a difference between that, right? And as a result of that, we hope to change the tone somewhat.
Is there a way to make your case and convince somebody that you have a better idea and a better course of action than the people that you're being critical of?
Yes, I think what we are focusing on is on issues. We're focusing on topics, and we are focusing on things that bind us together, which is one of the big ones is we are at least, we are more than 50% of the population. We should have representation. We should have representation on boardrooms, in Congress, local politics, and these are the things that do bind us together. The fact is that women, especially women united, can be very powerful. And we have to make the choice whether we want to continue to just complain on social media or whether we want to kind of roll up our sleeves and get to work.
Now, I know that you want to be less political about this in terms of being critical of people in charge and just putting forth ideas that you think are better ideas. But correct me if I'm wrong, didn't the Charlotte Women's March take a stand against the Federal Immigration and Customs Enforcement Organization in favor of abolishing ICE on your Facebook page, which you later revised to support ICE reforms? Did that happen?
I don't recall we ever said that we needed to abolish ICE. We take the stand that ICE as is working is not working. Okay. And we take a stand for immigrants. And we have worked very hard this past year to help get rid of 287G, and we try to communicate with the previous sheriff that we needed to some reform, and that didn't happen. And we tried to educate the public, so we put forums together, and we put a kind of a seminar together about 287G and why immigrants are important to our community.
That is one way, I suppose, that you bring to the table issues that perhaps white women of privilege may not be impacted by and therefore not consider. It certainly affects a lot of people in the immigrant community, but it's also a political issue. There are people on the other side who would completely disagree with you. How do you handle that?
Yeah, and I think that's why I really want to stay away from saying that we're focusing on non-political, because to the extent that politics or being political means that you're discussing issues, then clearly both organizations are going to be discussing issues, and our organization may not agree with what Charlotte Women's March has on particular issues, but we're going to be discussing issues. We're just not going to be discussing it in the context of partisanship. And I think that's a difference. Now, I will tell you that to the extent that the people outside of the organization and they want to discuss that on their signs, we believe in First Amendment, right? I mean, we're not trying to tell people that they can't come out and express on their signs their political positions on certain things or their positions on certain things, but we just want our organized program, which I believe this year is the first year that we've really had an organized program in such a manner where we're actually going to have a stage and we're going to have a lot of speakers. This year is really a celebration of women. So in addition to our speakers, which we hope will inform people of various issues so that people can walk away with something to think about, and hopefully to have further discussions about, and hopefully to mobilize after they leave. This is the first year we've had this kind of organized structure. And then afterwards, we're going to have a celebration of women. We're going to have DJ. We're going to have music. We're going to have vendors out there that are going to be, out there talking about their causes. We're going to be educating people on, the new voter ID law, and the vendors will be out there educating people. So it's a bigger kind of movement structure this year than we've had in the past.
And I don't know if either of you were involved in this, but maybe you were, or people who were. But as organizers, took a look at the last two marches and heard from people who did and did not participate, and heard from women about the issues that were important to them and that were or were not discussed in or dealt with in the previous march. What have you learned? What did women who you would like to be part of this tell you that you should be doing? What issues did they tell you needed to be addressed?
I don't know if people have said specifically what issues we need to address. I think that what we heard as the Charlotte Women's March group, what we heard was be more sensitive to the communities of color. Be more sensitive to issues that you may not be aware of. So many of us on the board have attended workshops, have attended book series, have attended things to kind of educate ourselves. Okay, because everybody sees the world from their own lens.
Right.
Or with their own lens. And I think so we need to educate ourselves. So my biggest thing for this march is, please, people, go and educate yourselves about the issues. Don't just repeat what you hear on social media. You need to educate yourselves, and if you're really going to make real change, you have to, educate and then educate others.
And where do you do that? Shaka Verdantam this morning from NPR was talking about how people learn and how the Russians were able to convince so many people that they were somebody other than who they really were, and that their point of view was your point of view, and you should be on the same page with us. And they did that because they infiltrated various organizations and posed as members of that organization because we trust the organizations with which we identify, and therefore we learn from people whom we trust. So where would you suggest people go to educate themselves about these various issues?
Well, I think part of it
because
is...
if you go to Fox News and educate yourself about these issues, it's going to be a different education than if you go to some other media outlet.
I think checking the sources. I think it's very easy to see something on social media and jump on the bandwagon, but I think you need to go back to reputable news sources. But
what's reputable to me may not be reputable to you. The Fox News fans buy it hook, line, and sinker. It's a reputable news source. Here are the facts, you decide, to quote Roger Ailes. That doesn't make it true, doesn't make it false. I'm just saying they believe that.
Yeah, but I do think that facts matter. And everybody, I might not be a big fan of Fox News, but, even with MSNBC,
right.
You have to roll up your sleeves and do some work. And check your facts and make sure that what you are believing in is something that is truthful. That's just a matter of fact.
We live in a world where facts seem to be malleable and where they don't seem to matter, but where we do agree on a fact, and there are people on the left and right who do agree on certain facts, we diverge on what we do and how we react to that information. The marches have been criticized in the past for being very liberal, for dealing with issues in a very liberal way. Will conservatives feel comfortable in that crowd?
I'm not sure. That's a difficult question. I think that if a conservative wants to come out and hear the other side, maybe, we're not asking any of our speakers to take a conservative or a liberal point of view. We're asking them to take a view on what they see. Mm-hmm. Some of them work in the community. What are they seeing in the community with respect to education? To the extent that conservatives want to come out, and we invite them to come out, right? To the extent that they want to come out and listen to what our speakers have to say. It might be enlightening. It might, turn on a light bulb. Who knows? But you're right. It's a really difficult question. It's really hard for us to. We look at the facts and we don't always agree with how we deal with those facts.
Okay.
And I think part of the issue is that for some reason we have turned the corner in this country in a very negative way, that common issues that are what we would consider kind of just human decency have been labeled as liberal. And I think that a lot of the values that we hold would be conservative values,
For instance?
Equal pay for equal work.
Quality education.
Quality education
that we
for
all
everyone.
should have the ability to breathe clean air. All of those. Now, we may not agree on how we get to to clean air. We may not agree, exactly, should we test more? Should we not test more? That the criminal justice system should be unbiased. That should be a general humanitarian principle. Now, whether as a black female, I look at it and say we're unbiased, we're biased because X, right? We might differ on that, but the general principle that we should have a criminal justice system that's unbiased should be something that everybody should be able to embrace. conservative or liberal.
Everything you said, I absolutely agree with. But I wonder, in this world where everything is so fractious, and where people of both sides have litmus tests for various candidates. If you don't believe, you may be the greatest thing since sliced bread, but oh my gosh, your crust is hard, therefore I cannot vote for you. How do you achieve unity of any kind in any group at any time? And that's what the goal here is. It's the Women United March.
You know, that's a really good question. I think that the thing to do is to reach out to other to other communities, to people that have different voices that you do, and try to bridge the gap. You know, see where do you have the common values, where do you have the common goals.
Women have the reputation, probably deservedly, of being able to hash out differences in a more polite manner. Guys will pull out their swords.
Women will too sometimes.
Do you think you can frame this, and you'll be successful on Saturday, in framing this as a safe place or a comfortable place to hear ideas that you may not have been exposed to yet, or you may not agree with, but it won't be a situation where you're shoving it down somebody's throat, or you're yelling or screaming or taking the stick on your sign and beating somebody over the head with it?
Oh, we hope so. We hope we don't have that happen.
So what do you want people on Saturday who come to take away?
I think we want people to realize that a march is great, and it will motivate you, it will engage you, but that the need to, in order for it to be a movement, which we desperately need in our, in Charlotte, in North Carolina, in the U.S., that they need to do some work. And you need to educate yourself, you need to become involved in politics, and you need to work towards making your community a better place.
The Charlotte Women United March is Saturday. It starts at 11 o'clock at First Ward Park, and the speeches and things like that, and then at 12:30 the march steps off on a particular route, which I'm sure will be in all the newspapers and on a website somewhere near you. Gina Navarrete and Renee Hill, both with the march and other organizations as well. Thank you for the hour.